Good morning to one and all, and welcome you all for this exciting session on tackling a flexible and dynamic workforce in the COVID normal. As the industry is actually gearing up for growth opportunities amid this new normal, and most of the organizations are trying to find out the right long-term strategy that is going to work for them. We've been seeing C-level executives around the industry, discussing on should we come back to offices, or how can we effectively track employees' performance without ensuring that they're not stressed or burned out. How can we restrict customer churn, and how do we tackle, how do we delight the customer, in fact. And the most importantly, how to address a volatile mix of skills that is required to deliver to the customer needs. And this keeps going on, and the debate is on. So at this point in time, we at NASSCOM, we thought that, this will be the right time to hear it from the leaders, bring in all the leaders in this forum from diverse industries to this forum to discuss, debate on the disruptions that is happening in the space of workforce management. Without further ado, I am very much pleased to introduce Mr. Harshvardhan, President, Global Business Head of Enterprise Digital Solutions at Ramco Systems, to moderate this session. Harsh has been responsible for running a very large, diverse global team of over 700 people across 15 global locations. He has done multiple hats of product development, product management, marketing, pre-sales, product implementation, and global client support. A very warm welcome to you, Harsh. Over to you to introduce the other panelists.
You're on mute. I'm sorry. Yeah. Thanks very much, Kritika. Firstly, I need to thank NASSCOM for organizing this very interesting topic. Without spending any more time, what I thought was we'll quickly dive into the topic. And after I do the introductions of each of the panelists, we have a very, very powerful panel across industries and with a very diverse set of background. Normally, we have this habit of rushing through the introductions. What I'm going to be a slightly different. I'm going to introduce each one of them and I've also requested each one of them to talk. When they talk, they'll talk about some interesting anecdotes on what they see in their workspace on various topics which we are going to debate on. And you'll also, just to make sure we are all going through enough, let me say, webinar fatigue or Zoom fatigue. So the objective here is to make sure we have a very huge audience quickly logging in. We can see the numbers raising up, substantial interest on this topic. So we'll try and keep it very interesting. And we'll also have enough time for a Q&A. You will also see panelists coming across the panelists, also provoking each one of us. And we are more than happy. NASSCOM is putting up the questions which will come up. So please don't wait until the end. If any specific questions are there or clarifications, please start putting it in the chat box. Along with help of Kritika, we'll moderate and make sure you are walking away with some good insights. With a panel like this, I'm sure each one of the experiences each one has, it will add to this repository of let's say, knowledge, which we are going to walk away from this webinar. First, to start off with, let me do the panel introduction. We have, I'm going in no particular order. I'm going by people I can see on the screen. The first name is of Vidyasagar, who is the Chairman and Managing Director of Adecco. I don't think anybody needs to introduce companies like Adecco, Ford, and Team Lease, and all the panelists here, including Sopra Steria and Explio. What I'll do is just to give a very quick background so that you can direct questions to people in that particular context, because their experience is very, very diverse. Like if you take, for example, Vidyasagar, he has been across 3 decades, very proven track record in building huge business and HR organization. Specializes in driving cultural, organizational, and business transformation. One very important point is, I think he alternates between India and Netherlands. So what's happening in the European geography in terms of the COVID world and how business models are changing and how the human aspects are something which he will dive in quite deep when he talks about his experiences. So please welcome Vidyasagar for this, and please point questions on human aspects of this topic which we are going to debate about. Quickly, I'll go down to Balaji Vishwanathan, who's the Managing Director and CEO at Explio Solutions. Again, somebody who comes with a huge amount of banking knowledge, product development, technology, and deep. We all know how the banking segment and how the digitalization in India is speeding up. There is a lot of debate currently going on that India in payments is far ahead even of US sometimes, the way the payment structures and mechanisms are working. Balaji comes with a huge amount of experience in that space. He's spent a lot of time across HDFC Bank, Yes Bank, and also across IBM Dakshin and a few other organizations. And he'll be able to share both on business models and on technology aspects. He will cover that fair bit of detail. Then let me go down to introducing Sunil, who comes from Teamlease Digital. He helps organizations in solving the talent supply chain challenge. And I liked something very specific in his profile, looking at a much broader perspective of IT employment growth from 5 million to 10 million sort of thinking process. And I know Teamlease and Adeco are in a very similar type of business, but the diversity and the experience they will share will be very different again. Let me now go down to introducing Babu, who's from Ford, a very different manufacturing organization. We all know why Ford is also heavily in the news in Chennai context. So I'm sure that will be throwing up different challenges and different perspectives, how he's handling them. And those aspects, I'll be requesting Babu to cover that in fair bit of detail. See, one element, we broke this into 4 broad topics. Before I introduce Savita, I just thought very quickly, just summarizing the 4 topics or 4 dimensions we're going to discuss this webinar for the next 60 minutes is all about. One is the angle related to business models, how the business models are changing. Second, the human angle, which is a very, very talked about topic today. And we all know about the great resignation debate, the human empathy factor. That's the second dimension which we are going to talk about. Third, another dimension which we have seen a huge amount of impact coming because of this COVID new normal is on the aspect related to regulatory aspects, which is very gray at this point of time. Why is it gray? Might be questions coming from the audience and from the panelists. We will try and dig deep into it and figure out the gray aspects and how we are going to manage those gray aspects of regulatory aspects. And lastly, the angle on technology. We all know how technology has dramatically changed, how paradigm shift in terms of how we have started working as if life goes on as usual. The technology companies, the stock price is only going up. There is no dearth of business happening on the technology front. So finally, let me introduce Savita, who comes from a very deep expertise in HR portfolio. She heads human resources at Sopra Steria, based out of Chennai, the only one who has put a very beautiful campus behind as her backdrop. All of us have some boring backdrops, but the rest of us are on that backdrop. She's a very versatile HR leader with a lot of experience across HCL Technologies, Sintel, and she champions organizational values, vision, driving talent transformation, and steering some of the finest global workforce initiatives and cultural transformation. So with this background of each of the speakers, what I'll do now is I'll be requesting each of the panelists to share amongst any of the dimensions while we have planned for this, so that it is not very casual. We have planned for this. They will talk about their experience and anecdote on each one of these dimensions. One by one, we will go through it. Might be just to make sure we don't miss any of us. I'll request Vidyasagar to start off, then followed by Babu, then followed by Sunil. Over to you, Vidya.
Thank you, Harsh. Thank you very much. So indeed, as you mentioned, Harsh, I've spent more than 25 years outside the country, and I had the honor, very much like Sabita does now, to be the CHRO at Philips for several years, for the consumer parts of the business. Now, I'm going to touch on the human aspect of what is I see evolving in the Western world, especially in Europe, and what I think are potential implications for us here in India over the coming years. Now, I think NASSCOM is a body which represents the tech industry heavily, right? The software and the tech industry. And if you think of it, it's one of those industries where sedentary lifestyles are the norm. Yeah, so you basically come in, you sit at work, and you sit non-stop for many hours doing your stuff, coding or doing other things, but you're basically sedentary. And I think sedentary lifestyles now account for the single largest reason for chronic illnesses across the world. And you see it in big numbers in the Western world. I'm sure it's not measured per se, but it's probably also rampant here in India. Now, chronic illnesses, of course, are cardiovascular illnesses, metabolic illnesses, but also mental illnesses. So I think these things are actually spiraling out of control. And in Europe, of course, it adds a huge cost burden to governments. So, and I think governments and employers especially are facing a big consequence because of the lifestyles that they lead. And it is leading to absenteeism, of course, but also presenteeism. And presenteeism is a nicely coined word, meaning you are at work, but you're not fully at work because you are just not able to contribute fully. Again, if you flip back, I think the Googles and the Facebooks and all these parts of the world, I think all these kinds of companies, they tried to address it by building these beautiful campuses, which had gyms, which had badminton courts, which had yoga sessions, good cafeterias, etc. But in the post-COVID world, I think one of the key lessons here is we need to empower our employees to make sure that they understand how they can work on their own physical and mental health and well-being. Because again, given the fact that as NASSCOM, as this group, we employ a lot of tech savvy people, educated people of high caliber, I think one of the key things is empowering them with data and knowledge about their own health is a great way of unleashing them on a journey of personal well-being. And I think that's the revolution which is currently happening in Europe. And we see many companies taking ownership of this and driving it tremendously. I think it's just a matter of time before we need to do it here in India as well, because the actual issues here are significantly larger, right? So if you think about the continuum of obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, India and Tech India is sitting on a ticking time bomb. And I think that's what we have to consciously think through and see how to address it. And I'm happy to discuss that together with Sabita as we progress through this session. And I think there are many companies which are doing quite some interesting things in the Western world. And the question is, how do we bring those things sooner rather than later to bear in India as well to actually address a big societal issue that may be ticking away as we speak.
Fantastic. Thank you, with a very good perspective. I'll request Babu to talk next. Over to you, Babu.
Thank you, Harsh. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Vidya. I think that was an interesting perspective you started sharing. I was going to talk about the business models, the changing business models, the flexible business models. I want to talk about it with 3 incidents that happened to me in the recent past. The first one was during Christmas break. We had a family reunion, and I was sitting with my daughter and my nephews, and we were having a chat. And just for context, one of my nephews is in IIT Madras studying machine learning and data science. My daughter is majoring in psychology. And there is another nephew of mine who is doing BCom with professional accounting, and few others were there. They're all going to be entering the workforce within less than 2 years from now. And I remembered a question, just to begin a conversation, I remembered a question that my uncle asked me when I was in college. What would you do after college? What would you like to do after college? And some of the replies that I got from my nephews and my daughter was surprising. And this is what they said. I want to work for as many companies as I can and eventually start running my own business. I have done so much of internships in my college with several companies, and so I enjoy it that way. Another person said, I want kick in life. I want to be a freelance worker, and otherwise life will just become boring sitting in just one company. And another person said, I want to work for 6 months in a year to make enough money for a living. And then I want to use that money to live for my calling for the rest of the year. All these answers really made me think that there is some change that has already arrived. Now, cut the scene and come into office. I came back to work January 3rd, and I started talking to my colleagues and a few employees within my company in Ford. And I asked them the question, what have you been doing outside of work hours? Because everybody is working remotely. What have you been doing outside of work hours? One employee said, I play piano in the church on Sundays. There's another employee who said, I do social work by teaching underprivileged children on Zoom calls. Then there was another interesting answer from an employee. The employee said, my friends and I are working on a startup idea and we are developing an app. Then I was stunned by that reply. I'm still wondering how I should be reacting to this. Why am I getting stuck? What questions should I be asking? Should I appreciate this person or probe more? Because I'm an HR person, should I be probing more on this person? Am I really concerned? If so, what's my real concern? Then I can realize, sitting back and thinking about it, I realize that each person has an intrinsic motivation within themselves and they go after it. Then, 1 week later, interview with a candidate. First question from the interview. After the interview is over, I asked the candidate, what would you like to ask? The first question the person asks, is this job on site or is it fully remote or is it a hybrid work? Will you offer flexibility? 3 instances in the last few days. Now think about some of these facts. Half of our employable talent in India is skilled in technology in some way, and within that half of the people are women. 8 out of 10 employees are going after internships from colleges. Every college student you talk about, they'll say, I'm doing this internship or that internship. And employees have started working from home for the last 24 hours. By default, will we be ever able to bring back the employees to the same offices that we had been working in the past? If we force them, will they return to these workplaces or will they start looking for employer who offers those choices? A fresh workforce today is not tuned to the concept of one company for life philosophy. They are no longer there in that space. Now, I was thinking myself, do we really want to hire skilled talent? Or do we want access to skilled talent? Do we want to hire them or do we want access to skilled talent? Change is really happening right in front of our eyes. Flexible workforce, flexible business models is here to stay. It is evolving so rapidly. I was reading a survey last week that said that the flexible workforce has the potential to overtake full-time employment as early as 2027. We are in 2022. In 5 years' time, flexible workforce can overtake full-time work employment. You don't have to take my word for all this. If you want to know more about it, right after this webinar, please pick up a conversation with a group of colleagues and you will know it for yourself what I'm talking about. You muted her.
Mute her.
Fantastic, Babu. I'll not give any perspectives. I want to make sure all the panelists give their detailed perspectives so that then we will weave it all together. Over to Sunil. I'm just going on and off on mute because of the audio. I thought there is some noise which is coming in. But if it is good, I'll be out of... Over to you, Sunil.
Thank you, NASSCOM, and this is a great opportunity for me to be amongst the allied panelists. A very good perspective shared by Vidya and Babu. I just want to take one step ahead in terms of what Babu has just spoken on the flexible business models. I would want to touch upon the change in the structures, the organization structures, which is going to help to adapt to the change in business models. We have very often we have seen that the structures are made in such a way that we have a large permanent employee workforce, and you have certain concentric circles. The permanent employment is the largest circle, concentric circle. After that, you have a temporary workforce, and I think very fast and very soon we are seeing that the concentric circles are increasing. We have already seen the gig workforce which has got into the concentric circles. We have got one-on-one contracts. So over a period of time, we would see that the concentric circles will shrink in the permanent workforce, and I think the temporary workforce and the gig workforce concentric circles will keep increasing. So that's where we should be prepared to. Why is this happening? This is happening because of the flexibility of the job, the need of the hour. We are moving from a management by inputs or management by activity to management by objectives. People are very soon realizing that outcomes are very important, and these outcomes can be obtained if you have a flexible workforce. I have two very interesting incidences during this pandemic. One of the instances is that when I wanted to get my hairs done, I called a hair specialist. He came and he did a very good job. Of course, we used a platform service to reach out to him. I asked him, how did his life change? He said that he was living in a village, and his uncle had a salon in Bangalore. And when this pandemic happened, and when there is a boom in request for home salon experience, he shifted his base from a village to here. What is this? How does it help him? How does it change the world of work? We are seeing that more and more workforce is joining. More and more people are joining the workforce. So it's a very interesting aspect. And while we have been saying that the increase in the gig workforce is leading to a lot of confusion, and we often hear that the aggregators are not paying enough and all those things. But we need to also realize that these aggregators and these platform services have given jobs to millions and millions of people. And today the gig workforce is a major workforce. As per an estimate by BCG, around 25 million gig workforce are already working, in handling various jobs. And it is estimated that, this will move to 90 million in the long term and contribute to around $250 billion overall. So I feel that, we should work towards creating a better framework, better regulatory framework. There is requirement from the government to look at the regulatory framework aspect to ensure that these gig workers are protected, their interests are protected, and we create an environment where this workforce are able to deliver the best outputs. So that's my perspective from a gig workforce.
Thank you, Sunil. You've covered the regulatory part of it. Let me hand it over to Balaji to share his perspectives coming from the banking industry, again, a huge employer. Over to you, Balaji.
Thanks. And it's very nice to be part of this forum. After being a banker for almost 15 years and being in the tech industry for more than 10, 12 years now, it's an interesting journey, particularly for people like us who are from Gen X, who are from the pre-internet era, and getting used to how it works nowadays. We are tech savvy, but not tech dependent, not glued to the gadgets to the current generation where everything is glued to the gadgets. And the biggest challenge has been primarily on the skilling element, because we know that the kind of new technologies, new languages, new programming methodologies, there are so many new things that are coming up. And it's not, not everything has to be learned from a classroom, which is what at least our generation has been used to. And, how people adapt to those new technologies, how do they learn? The biggest example was something which I could talk about my own son, a class 10 student. And, he came up with something, around 3-4 months back, saying that I'm doing a project for my school, and this is the app that we have built, and it's something called Tech Dadi. Tech Dadi is primarily looking at the older generation, which are 60 plus, and how they are already vulnerable to the kind of data, and how they are not able to protect the data, and how it will actually help them in doing it. And I was surprised. I said that, when did you start learning this? And that's when I realized that how we are all in the mode of trying and thinking in the old generation way of how to skill, how to actually people learn their technology skills, and how do they adapt to the new changes, while people are actually moving on online, and how they are adapting to all the fast changes that's actually happening around us. I took a course after starting interacting with my daughter and son, once again, interestingly, through Udemy, on what are the latest acronyms, because I used to work for IBM, which is known for acronyms. We all used to pride with those 3-letter words, which nobody else can understand, and only IBMers could understand. But nowadays, terms like IRL means what? You can't really figure out what that means, but that means actually in real life, because everything is actually on digital. Learning these acronyms, I actually literally spent almost 6 hours trying and figuring out what the latest acronyms are, and then trying and figuring out how do I connect to this generation to make sure that I understand what they are trying to say. That's the interesting perspective which we all have to adapt to. That's the reality, and that's what is going to come to us, for particularly the people born in the later half of 70s, who are still trying to figure out how the 95 plus born are going to react in the new work world, and adapting ourselves to make sure that we skill ourselves as well. We don't need to go and learn the Hadoops and Pythons, but we need to learn how the younger generation thinks, and how do we adapt to those new skills and the new technologies. And we have to be bold enough as well, because the generation of ours always have been little resistant to change. I wouldn't say not interested in changing, but have always been a little resistant to change. And how do we make sure that we come out of those shackles and make sure that we adapt to the changing world, the changing technologies, and be ready to experiment. That's what is going to be the key for us to manage the flexible workforce and the digital workforce as well.
Thank you, Balaji. Thank you very much. Again, very insightful on the technology front. I know a lot of things going to open up by the time next year, if you have a conversation around technology, it will be many other things, blockchain for COVID, and might be metaverse, and all of us will sit with the HoloLens and various lenses and go into each other's home, and a lot of things are going to change, I'm sure, in another 12 to 18 months' time. So the human aspect of it, I wanted to dive in a little more, because questions have already started coming in. And the first 2-3 questions were, again, very close to the human angle of it. So over to Sabita to share her perspective, and it will nicely move into those questions as well as they start coming in. Over to you, Sabita, to share your perspectives.
Thank you very much, Harsh. Good afternoon, eminent panelists, and all my dear friends in the audience. Hugely grateful to NASSCOM, and specifically to Kritika and Senthil, because it felt so lovely when we were doing our pre-session discussions. It felt really very nice hearing so many different views, and I'm sure the audience is going to have tremendous amount of takeaways. Vidya took away quite a lot of my points in that sense. But I would like to quickly start with, a little story which I brought to mind late last evening when I was thinking, what should I tell people when it comes to health and wellness? Because it's such a broad topic, and everybody knows that without health, there is no wealth. So I'm reminded of this episode a little before the COVID pandemic began, when I had to travel to a place where I grew up, the hills of India, and come from the Air Force. So I had gone down to Ladakh for a small little visit. I meet this 10-year-old monk, right? A 10-year-old monk who is conducting a session very passionately, trying to teach a couple of 5 to 6-year-olds on one side, and a lot of, corporate citizens like you and me on the other side. So 30 to 40-year age bracket on the other side. Very interestingly, and I'm somebody who just loves seeing people and learning from people. So I was looking at this little boy, 10-year-old, but a world of wisdom and a halo around him. So he was teaching people. He saw me from far away and called me and said, did you come here for something specific? So I said, I was happening to visit this monastery and I wanted to see what you all were doing. So what is it that you're teaching them? Is it the alphabets? Because they're 5-year-olds. Are you teaching them the alphabets? So he looked at me and he said, what is it that you first learned when you stepped into life? And I told him I learned my alphabets, right? Or the A to the Z's. So he smiled at me and he said, no, that's not what we teach here. So I was very curious, and I asked him, what is it that you're teaching them? And he says, I am teaching them to breathe. So I was finding it extremely strange. And I did feel that at a point he was insulting me. And I asked him, is it teaching you to breathe? I mean, doesn't that come naturally to all of us? So he smiled at me, and there was this huge amount of aura about this 10-year-old monk. And he looked at me with a very, very calm looking face, and he says, what is it that you miss doing when you get angry? What is it that you miss doing when you get very anxious? You forget to breathe. And if you're able to control that breath of yours, you know what, ma'am, you will be able to control everything around you. The world is in your lap. Now, this stayed with me for some time. I am somebody who's a fitness freak in that sense of the word, though I don't do it every day, but I still ensure my dietary habits are in order, no junk food. So coming from the Indian Air Force, I do maintain my disciplinary regime. However, this stayed with me for a long time. And when this pandemic set in and the world around us was literally thrown off gear, personally and professionally, I tried doing whatever this 10-year-old monk was teaching people. And that is to breathe. I know we all do our pranayamas. We all know to do it. We do it 2 days a week. We may not do it at all. But the fact of the matter is, how do we handle a difficult situation? The last 2 years, I think one of the most Googled up word around was, the resilience factor, right? Emotional resilience. How do we become resilient? Having come from that background, to me, we have seen battles from very close quarters. We have managed to evade grenades thrown around. We have come up in bunker schools. But top of it all was a great sense of well-being and happiness, because we were surrounded by elements of nature and we knew how to respect those fundamentals. So the basics are important. I think, I would like to draw attention back to those basics of life, because for a long time now, the corporate world has forgotten to respect wellness of self, wellness of people around them. And in the process, we have evolved into, if I can say, not too considerate society for colleagues around us. What we probably miss in the process is that not everybody is as fortunate as us. When we moved into the work from home mode, there were people who were living in joint homes. There were people who were trying to take calls embarrassed, because at that point in the beginning, teams did not have a set background. So there were people a bit embarrassed because their homes were all looking different. And we are human enough to recognize that, right? Everybody is not equally privileged and endowed. So as HR leaders, the focus today, whether it's HR or, technology or the business heads and the delivery heads, we're all talking about change management in a big way. So I would definitely like to throw more light as we go along, but quickly, a couple of change management trends that we're talking about when we say the great resignation wave on one side, the great migration on the other side, and the great resilience on the third side. How do we do it, right? So last year's trends will possibly not apply anymore, because change is here to stay, that we are all aware, right? The most cliched statement, change is only constant. But what we're talking about is the discipline of change management of the last 2 years should help us gear up for the crisis of probably the next 2 years, because we truly don't know what lies ahead of us. So there are a couple of things, today we have transcended from awareness. We have moved out of the situation of being aware of things around us to what to expect, which means we will also need to communicate and set expectations within ourselves as human beings, for our fellow colleagues, and for the people whom we are responsible for. The 3 dimensions to it, right? And then again, who could probably help us in this change bandwagon, the change agenda? It's leaders, it's managers, it's every single person who is, we have this concept called each one, reach one, which meant through the last 2 years, each one person in the organization took on this responsibility of connecting with and reaching out to one other person. So everybody became an HR ambassador, because everybody intrinsically has a lot of humaneness in itself, right? So we try to leverage that. And I think these are important as we move into 2022, because one doesn't know what lies ahead. We hear of the fourth wave getting ready, so all of those. Finally, we move into how do you really incorporate this change into company cultures, which means we just can't sit and talk in boardrooms. We're running out of time. We need to quickly, ensure our teams are aligned to us and they understand that there is a purpose in working with us. How do we bring in this purpose? A small example here, during the earlier days of the pandemic, I was dealing with a couple of people with different frames of mind. And there was a top performer, somebody known to me, who was definitely one of the cream de la cream of the organization. And he was looking at ending his life. Now, why would somebody like that do it? Because he's paid extremely, very high on the upper part of the pay scale. And the person has a wonderful family. Everything's going good in his life. He's doing so well, recognized in the organization. There's nothing that he can actually complain about. But then I got to hear from somebody in the organization that here is a person who needs you, Savita. So I traveled. I took the risk and I went down to his place, spent a lot of time with him, and I came up with this blessings chart. And I asked him to write, do nothing else, but just write down on a piece of paper all the blessings that he can remember ever since he, learned how to live life, or ever since he got into school. So this person was looking at me very skeptical. Okay, here is the HR with the HR jargon, And at the end of it, I told him, now count your blessings. Do you still want to end your life? Very simple things as that. And we had to explain to him that he's more resilient than he actually thinks he is. His problem was there was a lot of comparison with his sibling. And that had been mounting because people have all moved. There is no demarcation today between work and home. Everything happens at home. There is a lot of comparison. Parents, unfortunately, continue to do that even today, right? Irrespective of the age and the profile, they still say, oh, you know what? Your elder sibling would have done this different. So that's what hurt this guy. So we may have so many such examples. We can go on and on. But what is important for us to note is that authentic leadership combined with compassionate leadership is the burning need of the hour. Which means we're not just talking about empathetic leadership. Empathy is a given today. We're talking about how can you be compassionate? Can we put ourselves in the shoes of people we work with? Can we ensure that whatsoever we're doing today doesn't necessarily need to continue? Can we possibly look at a Friday in a month, which is no meeting Friday? Can we be sensitive to somebody's health situation and not do a meeting over lunch break? Very small things like these are the need of the hour. So on that note, yes, I think I'd like to close it with a statement saying, if we do not communicate what we want to do for them, it is totally, if you ask me, management by compassion and management by communication. And that's where I would like to my anecdotes. Thank you.
Thanks, Savita. Actually, of the questions which are coming in, two of the questions I will not go into. You have covered the change management aspects of it in fair bit of depth. I think I know who's, I'm sure the person who's been, I will not go through the names of the people, it will become too long. But the change management person knows the question he has put on change management, and you cover that in fair bit of detailed perspective. See, a couple of things. I thought by looking at the questions rather than amongst, I'd like to go for the questions which have come in. On the regulatory front, how much of the existing labor policies support gig workers or shift in the digital removing working on the work conditions perspective? Sunil, might be if you could share on that, that will be very helpful. While I'll request Vidya to share the next question, which is coming on the panel. Vidya, is the first question which came up. You can see it on the chat window. Over to you, Sunil.
You're on mute.
Yeah, Sunil, you're on mute.
Harsh, quite frankly, there are no laws applicable to gig workers in the current scenario. So that's the biggest worry. As we all know that India catches up very fast. The moment something new comes in the Western world, we just skip one level and we move to the next level and we catch up. I feel that gig economy is also catching up very fast. Currently. As I earlier mentioned, around 25 million gig workers are there. And in the long term, we expect around 90 million gig workers. But if you look at the laws applicable, we don't have any laws. Government has been working on working on changing the labor laws, by bringing in 4 labor codes. And last year in 2020, the gig workers have been included in the Social Security Code. And I think it is time for government to come up and implement these laws. If these laws are implemented, then I think the gig workers will be covered on the social security aspect, their insurance, their old age benefits, and a lot of other benefits what a normal employee gets will get covered. And if that happens, I think it will be good for the gig workers, and a growing labor workforce like gig needs government support and all the employer support to implement it. Today we see that in the absence of these laws, so at times we don't respect them, we don't give them all the facilities, they are arm twisted, and they have been pushed very hard. While there is money in this, there is money for the gig workers, and it's again outcome based. At the same time, we heard from Sabita and Vidya that human aspect of it is missing in the gig workforce. The way we treat the gig workforce, the human aspect is missing. And we, as users of gig workforce, and as maybe B2C or B2B, we use in both ways. We use some gig in our organizations, and we also use gig services to meet a lot of our daily needs. I think we also should bring in human aspect when we deal with them. Giving a 10% tip doesn't cost us much, but that's not a practice in India. Because we expect that his job is to deliver the goods, and he has done it. Why should I do it? But so I'm bringing a larger aspect to the softer aspect, the people aspect of it, and that's the thing which we can do. At the same time, government can bring in the regulatory framework. They have already started work on it, and there are inputs which have gone from various organizations, and from the all the areas which require them to implement that. I think they have come up with a model which said that minimum 2% of the revenue needs to be contributed by the platform and the aggregators, which will be used for the benefit of the gig workers. I think it's a call from the industry, and it's a call from all the gig users that we should quickly implement the labor codes, which in a way will help all the labor workforce, not just the gig, but gig. I would say that gig will definitely benefit, but the rest of the workforce, including the flexible workforce, will benefit from it. And the India has a typical challenge of having a large informal workforce. I think these 4 labor code implementation will help us in decreasing the informal workforce and increasing the formal workforce, which will eventually benefit all of us. As I explained earlier, the organization structures are going to change in the future of work. The concentric circles with the permanent employment will shrink. The flexible workforce and the gig workforce and the consultants and the other type of employment, the employee-employer relationship itself is changing in a big way. So I think with the regulatory framework, if the government is able to put the regulatory framework in place, implement the labor codes, it will be a big benefit for all of us.
Perfect. Thank you, Sunil.
Just can I ask you one question here? We talked about these subjects in the past as well. So, while we have seen the gig workforce and the flexible workforce increasing, or probably more adaptation in the blue collared work area, we have always struggled. At least I have been trying to figure out the gig workforce model. We also built in my last organization a gig platform as well for the kind of work that we do in the tech industry. That is more developers and project managers and project analysts and other stuff. But we have always struggled, and even during the pandemic era, that particular segment of the gig workforce has not certainly grown to the extent of what we have seen in the other blue collared workforce. While, of course, regulatory element is one part of it, I think the other bigger element is, the organizations haven't been able to figure out like what Babu mentioned about his nephews and nieces saying that, no, I want to work for multiple companies at the same time.
Yeah.
Those kind of adaptation has certainly not been there, at least in a service industry, because we are all used to thinking of saying that, no, this client, this particular guy is assigned to this particular project, and it's only beyond a certain level where you have shared resources and other stuff. So what do you think should drive that from an industry perspective? Of course, one is the regulatory element, but there is a significant amount of work that we need to do from an industry perspective as well.
Yeah, so a very good point, Balaji, and good question. I think we have been discussing on this point for quite some time in the industry, amongst the industry leaders. See, one important way of behavior in India is that we are quite used to management by instructions. Management, we have still not moved to management by objectives. And when it comes to the blue collar work, the adaptation of gig workforce was very quick, because there is a end point to every activity what they are doing, whether it is delivering something or whether riding you from one place to other place. But when it comes to the white collar space, in the tech space, as you said, the gig is not a new term in tech space. We all know that there has been gig across, not just tech space. In the world, the gig was already there. It's like a freelancing. Now we renamed it as gig. But what has happened is that since the management by objective or outcomes is not the behavioral aspect of a lot of the workforce, a lot of these gig works which were picked by the gig or the freelancers did not reach to the end objective in the stipulated time, or as per the expectations from the clients or by the people who have given them. This led to a situation where there is a mezzanine floor which is required. There needs to be somebody who regulates the gig workforce in India, in Indian parlance. To start with, the directly gig workforce getting engaged with a client may not lead to the real outcomes. We have some distance to go, so we need a mezzanine floor or an intermediary, a company, an organization who have experience in managing flexible workforce, so that they will be able to ensure that there is a regular interaction between the three parties involved, and the outcomes are happening in the stipulated time. So that's the immediate ask. Once we start with this, we can't directly jump to 100% gig doing, without any intervention. So I think in the short term, we will require this mezzanine floor, this intervention from flexible workforce companies to manage this. And I think over a long period of time, if I take a long shot, I think we might see a situation where gig workforce will adopt to this new way of work, and they can directly start managing this. That's the reason, if you look at the Indian market, if I take the IT example, IT workforce today is near to 5 million, out of which the flexible workforce is around 3%. It's very, very small percentage, 3% compared to US, which has 18%, and even Europe has close to 18%. But in India, it's just 3%. And again, if you look at the gig workforce participation in IT employment, it is less than 2%. I think it's hardly less. It's less than 1%. At overall level, it is 2%. So I think unless we evolve as a country, the work cultures change, I don't think this adoption will become quick. The pandemic has helped us to understand the employee-employer relationship. It's just not management by activity; it is management by objectives and outcomes. That's the reason you are seeing the increase in the flexible workforce. In the last 1 year, the flexible workforce has already gone up by around 10%, and we foresee that the flexible workforce will double in the next 2 to 3 years, and the gig workforce will also start catching up. So to summarize, in the short term, we will require an intermediate organization who will manage the gig workforce so that they are helped to take it to the outcome based objectives. On a long term, I think when the workforce start understanding the model and adopting to the new way of work, we will see an explosion.
Perfect. Thanks, Sunil. I think quite a few questions are pouring in. What I'll do, a slight change in the way what we'll do is we'll collate all these questions and also put it across to all the panelists and have a lot more answers and share it back through NASSCOM separately. While I do that, we still have another 10 minutes to go. So what I'll do is might be request we have covered a fair bit of detail on the regulatory part of it. And there are some more questions on endemic and a few other things which are coming up. But I'll request Vidya to share on the employee perspective, specific, how do we assess and anticipate change in people aspiration? How do we design interventions to ensure last mile delivery to the people? So that's one angle which came up. Another very related question was on the concept of employee experience as the workforce becomes very flexible and dynamic and digital. Vidya, might be if you could throw some light on that. Again, it's all related to the human aspect of it. It will be very helpful.
Yeah, a couple of things. Also building on what Sunil just explained and what Balaji mentioned. I think there are two things, right? So the government enacts laws, but the law, I think as industry leaders, I think it's important for all of us to implement both the letter and the spirit of the law, because the law can never capture the spirit with which it is intended. And I think as long as we always say that as leaders, we think about the aspect of human and societal well-being, and then we use that as a kind of a foundation on which we do things and we work towards our employees and our customers, etc. I think that's always a key, I think, an anchor point around which we can all revolve. I think that's an important one. Now, going back to aspirations, last mile delivery, customer or employee experience, etc. I think it boils down to the ability of us in organizations as leaders to truly understand what that employee is going through at that moment in time, right? Let me again just make it very anecdotal. May last year, wave 2 COVID, it hit many people, many hard across the country. If not our employees directly, for sure their families or friends. It was there. Now, I think one of the things that as at least in some of the customers that we work with, but also many of our employees, the first thing that we did was we said, can we split our monthly pay cycle into two? Can we go into a bi-weekly pay cycle for these 2 months to ensure that we give people money in their hands exactly at that moment that they were struggling financially to pay for those oxygen cylinders, to pay for those hospital bills? Yeah, I mean, it's quite normal in the US, right, to have bi-weekly or weekly paychecks. Now, that was something which was quite unique. I mean, the minute we implemented that here in India, I can tell you the experience of the people that we employ both internally and we deployed externally immediately went up, because for them, they realized that we were putting ourselves in their shoes. We understood what they were going through, and we knew that assistance at that moment was critical. Now, I think sometimes we make a customer employee experience, etc., extremely conceptual and high flying, but I think taking it down to that everyday need and sensing that and touching them on that moment when they require help, I think is a great way to actually understand what that employee experience is. And I think to me, I always say, let's boil down things to the simple things in life, understand it and solve it then and there. Because these things, of course, we as leaders have to take the call, right? Can I move my cash flow forward? Can I make sure that I pay people out after the 15th day of the month? I think for me, I constantly have these discussions, both here, but also in Europe, in HR, where by saying that it's nice to be very fancy. It's nice to have all kinds of high-flying esoteric views on customer experience, employee experience, but the most impactful ones are the ones that are needed in that moment in time. To me, that's a perspective that I have towards employee experience. It's always contextual. It's always the need of the moment. And if you don't address that, everything else, which is nice and fancy, comes to nothing at that moment in time. That's one. Aspirations, I think, to me, people, I always love the simple video which is online by Dan Pink, right? It's about what really matters. It's about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Yeah, I think I think also Babu mentioned it. These are things. Why does somebody go and play a musical instrument? He doesn't have a KPI around it. He doesn't have a metric around it. It's just that it's something he genuinely enjoys. So to me, I think bringing back that notion of helping our employees, helping our teammates unlock those three things for themselves. What is my bigger purpose? What would I like to master to achieve that purpose? And what is that scope and bandwidth I'm given to actually go behind that? And if those things align with the purpose of the organization, I think that's when we have a highly engaged workforce who will realize their aspirations through the purpose of the company. I think those are some of the thoughts that I have around it, Harsh, on these two.
Perfect. I think we're coming to the close of this and the questions are pouring in. So what we'll surely do is we'll not disappoint the people. We will collate all those questions which have come in and share it amongst all the panelists, come to a conclusion on some sort of a point of view paper on this subject on all dimensions. People are asking about diversity, people are asking about discrimination, people are asking about automation in HR, people are asking about bi-weekly payroll stuff. The questions are, and what happens if the government were to, what are the regulatory stuff which we can do when it is declared an endemic? The questions are still pouring in. So what we'll do is, let me put it across. I don't think we'll do justice if I just put it across in the next 1 minute, which is left. What I'll take this opportunity to thank all the panelists and also NASSCOM for organizing this very insightful session and the experience each one of you carries. And we wanted to make sure that it's not a boring, just a theoretical session. So you would have heard from each one of them personal experiences, either personal or their organization experiences. And how do we link it to those four big topics which we spoke about? And I thought that was a nice way to go through this whole webinar. I'll thank everyone for joining this, and we will soon come back. And people, please do. I think NASSCOM surely has the list of all the people who have logged in. There we have close to 200 people online, and I'm sure we will share back through a point of view paper. We will assist, and we'll come back to you all soon for it. Thank you very much, each one of you, and the panelists especially, and NASSCOM.
Yep. Thank you so much. This is a topic which will not be able to do justice in an hour, but given the time, I think we have covered most of the points. Thank you so much.
We have covered all the points. Thank you very much, Balaji.
Thank you,
Vidya,
Babu.
Sabita and Sunil. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, audience. Bye-bye.